All right. Hey, Ruckus Makers. We are here today with Professor Oded Netzer, who is the Vice Dean of Research and the Arthur J. Sandberg Professor of Business at Columbia Business School, an affiliate of the Columbia Data Science Institute, and the author of Decisions Over Decimals. Professor Netzer is a world renowned expert in data driven decision making and extracting meaningful insights from data. He wrote dozens of papers published in the top tier academic journals. His award winning research is broadly read and highly cited. All right. He is an award winning teacher as well at Columbia Business School's MBA, Executive MBA, and Executive Education programs. Professor Netzer, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Danny, and thank you for inviting me. With this introduction, it can only go downhill from here, but let's make it happen.
In our brief interactions, I know that the Ruckus Maker watching or listening is certainly in for a treat. And one of the things that I was excited about in terms of bringing you onto the show, they like to say data rich, information poor. Like school leaders are immersed, absolutely immersed in data. And I don't know that we actually use it all that effectively. So I want to hopefully leverage your wisdom and experience, to help out the Ruckus Maker watching or listening. But the opening story where I want to take us first is to have you talk about the story of Coke introducing a new flavor, right? That's a bold move to do. And why they were asking the wrong question when they introduced that flavor.
Yeah, that's a story that goes way back. I'm a little bit disclosing my age here, knowing this story, going back all the way to circa 1985, where Coke was introducing a new flavor. And in fact, the story backs from the few years before that, where Pepsi repeatedly showed that in blind taste tests, Pepsi tastes better than Coke, meaning people who did not know what they're drinking were blindfolded, or they weren't really blindfolded, but they were giving a cup that they just had the drink and didn't know what they're drinking. When they were drinking Pepsi or Coke, they really preferred Pepsi over Coke. People preferred Pepsi over Coke. And, the people at Coke, they actually replicated this style. So Pepsi went with this on advertising. And of course, that's the executives at Coca-Cola lost sleep over it, as you could imagine. And it really bugged them because they have ran the same experiment themselves and they found that it's true. People in blind taste tests did prefer Pepsi over Coke. By the way they do these tests is also interesting, maybe for the listeners. The way it is often done, you do an A, B, and a C cup. Two of them are the same, one is different, and you don't ask people only which one they prefer, but which two are the same and which one is different, to see that people can actually tell the difference to start with. But on average, people preferred Pepsi over Coke in these blind taste tests. And because that's bothered the executives at Coca-Cola so much, they went into the R&D labs and started creating a drink that people would beat Pepsi in these blind taste tests, that would taste actually better than Pepsi. And they created the product. It was called New Coke. That's how they named it. Because they wanted
today would be Coke Plus.
Yeah, they wanted to keep the brand name, right? I mean, Coke is a big brand name, so they would keep the New Coke. And they went with it to the market. There were literally riots in the streets. People went out demonstrating, we want back our old Coke. And, the one that we've been drinking for generations over generation, kind of the American heritage drink, right? We want back the classic Coke. And Coke realized what's going on. They went back on their decision and said, okay, we're going to bring back the classic Coke, after people, again, literally rioted in the streets. Now, there were actually millions of dollars in marketing research and research being done to come up with this new flavor. So what really went wrong? I mean, how could the company go so wrong we're talking about a multiple millions dollars type of decision, right? Mm-hmm. And the reality is that really Coke asked the wrong question. And you'll see that kind of a common thread to the way I think about thinking about being data driven is around asking the right questions. And Coke asked the wrong questions. The question that Coke asked was, well, if you go blindfolded, which one tastes better? But we
Hmm.
actually do not go to the supermarkets blindfolded. We go to the supermarkets eyes wide open, look for the products. And the reality is that when our eyes are open, people did want Coke not just for the taste of it, again, for the history that goes with it, for the drinks that the generations have been drinking. And that's truly was the difference, right? The wrong question was to ask at all, what do people prefer when they're blindfolded? Because we rarely are blindfolded, and actually it doesn't matter what we prefer when that where we are blindfolded. What truly matters is what do we prefer when we get the same product again that existed there for many generations, and eventually again walked back. There is some argument, by the way, that suggests that the whole thing benefited both Pepsi and Coke because sales for both went up after that. But I don't think that was intentional. I think it was really asking wrong question in a well conducted marketing research. The research itself was well conducted.
Hmm. That's really interesting. I remember the blind taste tests. I remember seeing those commercials, and yeah, certainly interesting. Yes, it does date us. That's okay. It seems to me that context matters a lot, right? Because you said we walk into the supermarket, the grocery store, we are not blindfolded, right? And we're bringing yeah, our history, family. We look at the marketing, whatever, all this kind of stuff to make this decision with our eyes wide open. I'm just curious, like, do you have anything else to add in terms of how the ruckus maker watching or listening when they're thinking about data and questions too, like the right questions to ask? Yeah, how does context play into that, and how can we avoid sort of the blind spot that Coke had and avoid the wrong question?
Yeah, I think that this is not me saying this is maybe the smartest person ever lived. Albert Einstein said that I'm not. It's not that I'm smart. I'm just spending more time with the problem. We should be
Mm,
both as again leaders in education, but also our students, right? We should be thinking carefully about the problem. We should be spending more time with the problem. We tend to have the tendency to jump straight into solution, to go straight into solution mode, to ask ourselves
mm,
how can we address it, right? Because sitting and thinking about the problem doesn't feel like work. Looking at data, analyzing things, or again, if you go back to our students and we tell them, oh, here's a math question and just want them to provide the answers, right?
mhm,
Spend time thinking about the problem. In fact, if you look at again, let's go back to our students in education. Most of the mistakes come from people reading wrong the questions, not from really not knowing the answers, right?
right.
Not spending
Mhm,
enough time with the problem. And as you're thinking through the problem, you are likely to identify different angles, different dimensions to the problem, like the one that Coke has missed. Someone would have at some point said, well, that's fine, but should we also run tests that are not just taste tests, but taste tests that actually are not blind taste tests, and realize, you know, yeah, we want to taste better for blindfolded, but let's make sure that we also taste better for those who actually know what it is they're drinking. But more generally, I think we should cherish the skill of asking questions. In fact,
mhm,
in this book that I've written, Decisions Over Decimals, together, by the way, with two colleagues of mine, Chris Frank from American Express and Paul Magnone from Google, one of the things that we are arguing is that maybe we're doing job interviews all wrong. The way we do
hmm,
job interviews is we ask questions and we hope that whoever is on the other side going to give us really good answers. But if you buy my argument that we need to be good at questioning, at asking questions,
mhm,
then it means that we should be testing for it when we interview a person. We should see if they're good
hmm,
question askers, right? Not just responding to questions. And I don't mean questions such as, well, tell me what is the culture in this school, right? I mean, this is an easy question. I'm talking about at
mhm,
least easy question to ask, not necessarily to answer. I think about a question in which I give you a scenario and I want to know what questions you need to know. We have this problem in the school. Here is a scenario. Now tell me what, not just solve the problem, but what do you need to know in order to answer this question? What do you wish you knew in order to answer this question?
Yeah, well, I think correct me if I'm wrong, right? Please, but it sounds like what you're asserting here is that by a person demonstrating the questions to ask, not just how to solve the problem in this scenario, they are giving you a glimpse on how they think, right? And if you know the quality of how they think, then you can make some guesses about the type of value or if, what they would bring to the table, so to speak, in your building. Is that correct?
And how they would yeah, and definitely, and how they would interact with others, right? By
Mm,
asking questions, by being more of a part of a community, by seeking information, not just by providing answers. I
right.
We don't
Yeah.
expect that anyone has all of the answers, but I do expect people to know how to find the answers, which often comes with good questions.
Yes. Yeah. How would they figure it out? Perfect. I think you have another story too about a firefighter who saved his team from a collapsing building.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, we talk about this in the book, and actually, it's not even our story. It's coming actually from Malcolm Gladwell in his book Blink, where we talk
Mm,
about these blink moments that people have. And this actually a story actually relates to a framework that we talk about in our book in Decisions Over Decimals, where we call it quantitative intuition, which kind of sounds like
mhm.
an oxymoron. How can we take quantitative and put it together with intuition? I mean, aren't people like right brain, left brain? I'm good in math, I'm good in more of humanities and so on. Our argument is actually, if you want to deal with data, the only way to do it, particularly at either a leadership level, or I would argue even again teaching kids in school, is to actually combine the data with a good sense of judgment and intuition. And we use for that the story of the firefighter, where um, the story there is a firefighter is rushing. It's a true story. I mean, a squad, a firefighting squad was rushing into a burning building, running straight into the kitchen because that's where most fires are. And then the leader of the fire squad going into the building, looking around, check that they look at the ceiling, looks at the walls, collecting information. Again, data in the world of firefighting is that you're assessing the environment,
Mhm.
the context, as you mentioned before, Danny. And as they are standing there in the building, 2 minutes later, the leader of the firefighter squad calls into the radio and say, "Everybody out right now." They leave the building, and about a couple minutes later, the building collapsed. So they interviewed
Wow.
him and they say, "Can you tell us, how did you make this heroic leadership decision? I mean, truly saving the lives of his squad." And he said, "I don't know. A lot of the things that I've seen in this building I've seen before, and I never called the shot." But they argued further. They said, but truly, can you still help us? Can you still think through what was it here that caused you to call the shot? Because we want to teach future leaders to behave in a similar heroic way." And he thought about it, and then he said, "Well, now that I think about it, there are a couple of things that surprised me in that building. The first one was that the level of heat in the that I felt did not match what the fires that I saw with the eyes. There was less fire than how hot the building was. And the second was he said that it was quieter. Usually you go to a burning building and it's super, super loud from the fire. So here it was
Mm,
quieter. And that was like, I don't know
mm,
what's going on here, but something here is wrong. So now that I'm standing outside, I can tell you what happened. I didn't realize that then. It was much more of a subconscious intuition. Eh, When I can tell you exactly what happened. It is the fire was in the basement. Because the fire was in
mm.
the basement, the fire went up in the walls. It was hot, but I couldn't see the fire. It was also less noisy than usual, and that's why the building collapsed inside into the basement. Usually, again, fires are in the kitchen. This one happened to be in the basement. This is an example of what we call quantitative intuition. Again, you may ask, where is the quantitative? The quantitative come more from the way, again, you collect information in that environment.
Mhm.
But looking for these surprises, and the argument here is you're looking at information. Again, information can be data, information can be a parent comes and tell you something about their view about the school. Information could be teachers talking in the during the break, and you collect information there. Look for the surprises, look for the things that don't match the pattern, not necessarily the things that do match the pattern. And we tend to
Right.
so often look for the patterns because we are trained to look for patterns. cherish surprises. Surprises are super important, and in fact, if anything, surprises are the places where we should be investigating further. The pattern, we know the pattern, and that's exactly what we expect. Spending the time truly at the surprises would help us either find problems or really good insights. Either way, you benefits.
Yeah, so explore those outliers and get curious about why they exist, the patterns we're familiar with to some extent. So, got
Yeah, and
it.
I love that they use the word outlier, by the way, because statisticians, right, or mathematicians call these outliers. And what do we do with outliers? We throw them away or we put them in the appendix. We need
Ah,
to
okay.
actually focus on these as opposed to, again,
Yeah.
outliers have a negative connotation to
Hmm.
them, something we put aside, right?
Yeah,
Our
yeah.
argument, my argument is bring them actually to the center, and that's where you spend more time actually looking at these outliers. Why are they the outliers?
Brilliant. Well, I used that word for you, Oded, so I'm glad it landed well. I want to
Thank you
talk
for
about
fitting it in.
for sure. So I want to talk about students and the student experience with math, right? So one thing that I want to explore with you, and I think this would be really helpful for the ruckus maker watching or listening. Talk to us about just teaching kids to guesstimate, right, and why that's
Right.
so important.
Yeah, and I really want to uh, provide maybe my kudos to the current education, at least where my kids are going to school, that I have seen that
Sure.
the education around math has changed and has changed
Hmm.
towards valuing things like guesstimating. I actually have seen my kids coming back home with homework like, how much is 209 and 1 times 29, right? And where the idea really is to tell them, do not solve the problem, but rather guesstimate the number, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
if you give me 201 times 29, I should be figuring out that I'm in the range of 6,000. I don't need to know the number. In fact, there are very
Right.
few occasion in life when I ask you that question of 201 times 29 that I actually expect you to solve the math as I've learned in school. When I need to know
Sure.
the actual answer, if you really need to fit a closet exactly into the hole in the wall, and I need to know exactly the distance, yes, this decimals may matter, right? But in most problems we need to solve, most places where we do use math, all I need is a ballpark of the number. In fact, I would even argue that in many cases, when we do provide the exact number, we are we are not just wrong; we are misleading. To give you an example, let's imagine that you're creating now a forecast of the school's budget for next year,
Mm-hmm.
and because you're using Excel and you're using multiplication of different things, you're going to tell me that the school budget for next year going to be 800,039, right, and 45 cents.
Yes.
That's projection for next year budget. We know it is inaccurate. There is no way you would know the budget for next year for the school at the level of the decimals after these decimals, right? It's not only wrong in your forecast for next year because it's wrong. There is no
Mm.
way you would know it to that level. It's actually misleading because you give me the perception that actually you know the budget for next year down to the decimals, which we know you don't. So when we create even these sophisticated Excels, we actually should be rounding up to the nearest thousand, maybe even 10,000, depending on your level of confidence with these numbers, or maybe even providing a
Yeah.
range. And again, the way I've learned math, unfortunately, did not include guesstimating at all. It included
Mm.
math has right and wrong answer, and you better give me the right answer, otherwise I'm going to deduct points, right?
Right.
Whereas, again, if you think about how we use it in life, math, most of the time we use it at the level of guesstimating. We use it at the level of, if you give me around the right number, I'm totally happy. And I really think that schools that do that are moving in the right direction of educating the next generation to be feel comfortable with guesstimating. To we call it kind of t-shirt sizing, right? I mean,
Mm.
there is a reason why for t-shirts we provide the small, medium, large, extra large, and so on, because that's the way it needs to fit the body. I don't really care at the level of the small differences. When we buy a dress shirt, it's not good enough. I need to know it
Sure.
to a finer level. We should teach similarly when
Hmm.
we teach math, not just the outcome, but what are we going to use it for, and therefore how accurate does it need to be. And again, I
Right.
want to congratulate these schools that already have taken these steps, at least in today's education, and I encourage those who didn't to adopt this method of teaching students to guesstimate. I think it's a truly important skill.
100%. I love to pad my numbers and always estimate a little higher because then when I typically come in under budget, I'm always pleased, right? Because I'm always padding it a bit. But that, I don't know, maybe it's a bit of a cautious, sort of conservative approach to forecasting and, budgeting around certain items, but that certainly helps me. So I'm resonating with what you're saying. Well, Oded, I'm loving our conversation. When we get back, I want to talk one more math question and how to fear people, or excuse me, relieve people, right? And free them from the fear of, I don't know how to do math. And I want to get into AI because that's a hot topic these days in education and hear your take on that as well. Learn
Great,
how
looking
to
forward to it.
successfully, yeah, pleasure. Learn how to successfully navigate change, shape your school's success, and empower your teams with Harvard's certificate in school management and leadership. Get online professional development that fits your schedule. Courses include leading change, leading school strategy and innovation, leading people, and leading learning. You can apply today at betterleadersbetterschools.com/Harvard. When classrooms come alive with conversation, teachers and students, they both thrive. Last year, teachers using TeachFX increased their student talk time by 40%. You might be thinking, can an app really do that? Well, even trying something like embracing extra wait time to create space for student talk can feel like a risk. But with TeachFX, teachers see the power of those practices in their own classroom level data. It's like having a personal instructional coach on your phone, tablet, or laptop. Ruckus makers can start a free pilot with teachers today. Go to teachfx.com/betterleaders and learn how to get started. Teachers give it their all to empower their students. But what is it that truly lays the foundation for learning? What sets all students up for success? As you know, unless students develop a solid foundation for learning, it doesn't matter how great teachers deliver content, how emergent the technology is, or even how engaging a lesson might be. When students hone executive functioning skills, those seemingly intangible suite of habits and behaviors, teachers' efforts find fertile ground and everybody succeeds. Ironically, did you know that executive functioning skills are rarely taught? Rather, they're best learned when students get practice using them by virtue of engaging in a predictable daily learning routine. Our friends over at Organized Binder have created a new course that will teach your teachers how to set your students up for success. You can learn more at organizedbinder.com/go. And lastly, I would love to invite you to Denver. We're hosting a live mastermind experience called the Leadership Optimization Compass. We only have 2 tickets left, and the event's going to be amazing. So if you go to betterleadersbetterschools.com/Denver 2023, you can read up on the event and snag one of the last 2 tickets. You will not be sorry. All right, we're back with Oded Netzer, professor, who is also an author. He wrote Decisions Over Decimals. You could go over to dodthebook.com and pick up your copy, which we highly recommend. And we were talking math. We were talking students and their ability or inability to guesstimate. And we also want to free people. We want to free ruckus makers and their students from the fear of, I don't know math, right? A lot of kids might feel that way, maybe even adults. So, Oded, what would you say? How can we free the people?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's one of the reasons that we wrote the book was exactly this myth. There is this myth that people are afraid of using data because they're saying, "Well, I was on top of my class in math. I'm not an Excel whiz. I'm not this type of person. I'm more of the right brain, not the left brain type person."
Sure.
And we believe it's a myth. It's a real myth, meaning there are skills needed to to be data driven, to be able to rely on data. In fact, I often say that
Hmm.
I have good news and bad news. I'll start with the bad news. The bad news is it's not a choice whether to make decisions with data. I mean, us as rocket makers, our students eventually will need to use data. This is reality. The good news
Yeah.
is you don't need to be top of class in math to do it. You don't need to be real to have really good math skills to do it. One approach we already talked about, guesstimating. Learning how to guesstimate does not require solving logarithms in your head, does not require solving square roots in your head. It requires really simple way of operations, which our brain is often wired for, right? So these guesstimating type of tools help free us from the need to be correct, from having, again, doing fancy math in our head to figure out how much is 2001 times um, 201 times 29. Um, the other the other thing with numbers or with quantitative skills, in order to evaluate a number that you see, you rarely need to know math. What you do need to have is
Hmm.
something you mentioned before, Danny, which is context. and
Mm.
and context we learn from being in the environment, from seeing things around us, so that when we look at a number we are saying, I don't know what you've done wrong, but this number is absolutely wrong. And the reason why I know this number is absolutely wrong, because I've seen a few other numbers, or I've been in that area, and this is just not correct. And that requires very different skills. In fact, I would argue that it's a skills that those who spend most of their time with math, I'm thinking data scientists or statisticians, are actually lacking context, because they're focusing more on how to calculate the numbers and less so about the environment, being what I like to call a fierce interrogator of data. First interrogator of data are not
Mm.
those who interrogate it more from a mathematical point of view, but rather from the context point of view, and saying, I know that this number is wrong. Okay, again, I can't tell you what mistake you've made in your calculations, but I look at
Mhm.
this number and I can tell you it's wrong. And that's a very important skill that people who believe, oh, I can't do math, are often afraid to employ, because they say, well, I don't know how you calculated it. It shouldn't matter. In fact, what should matter is that you know that this number is wrong, or at least it hurt in the stomach. Maybe the number is right, and maybe they'll bring you a whole explanation of why that is right. It's exactly what I mentioned before. Look for the surprises. Bring your, and by the way, surprises are by definition quantitative intuition, because what is a surprise? You have information,
Mhm.
you have priors or intuition, and the two do not match. Look for these cases, you'll become a really good interrogator without being a math whiz.
Hmm. Okay, so looking for those the surprises, the outliers have seemed to popped up again, and it's just certainly very important. I'm curious, do you have any quick tips, I guess, in terms of teaching leaders how to look for those surprises?
Yes, I mean, it's not a quick tip, that's a very long tip, is experience. But Heinrich Heine
Right.
once said that experience is a great school, but the fees are high. So yeah, having experience helps, because then you look at a number and you say, look, I've been here for a long time and
It's
this
not
is
in the
wrong.
ballpark.
So what are the shortcuts to experience, right? Because again, we can't always afford to
Hmm.
have the experience, because we move from one place to another and so on. And learning a few numbers at the tip of your fingers. So consultants often do this before they go into a new environment. They often spend a day or two in the office just learning a few numbers. And again, you don't need to be top of class in math in order to just look at numbers. Ask yourself, what is the top school doing? What is the worst school doing? Now I know the range, so now when I see a number, I can say it falls within the range or not, right? These type of
Right.
things that allow you to jumpstart the experience, if you will, by reading a little bit and learning the environment. So spend some time looking for reports, for example, about the industry or about the topic. So when you see a number, you can actually compare it to that and say, does it fall within or outside any reasonable range?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Cool. And let me ask you, I got to ask about AI. I know it's a topic you're very interested in. And obviously it's in a lot of school leaders' minds these days, especially well, everybody loves to talk about Chat GPT. I know there's a lot more AI than just that. But yeah, in terms of generative AI and your research, implications for school, what are you thinking?
Yeah, and I know that I've been in a meeting that didn't discuss ChatGPT in the past 3 months or 4 months. Um, I mean, I actually do a lot of my research on this topic, on topic of AI, and specifically on language type models. And
Hmm.
I have to say that what we have seen since November of 2022, when OpenAI introduced ChatGPT, is a true leap in technology and innovation in terms of where we are with generative AI. And it also started a little bit of an arm race across um, the giants in that industry to, and we've seen even since then a huge progress in what these tools can do, which means we truly live in a different world, and I think we better adapt to this new world we live in, right?
Right.
One question that people often ask is, well, what do we do with it in the classroom, right? And I think a good analogy for us is to go back to calculators and when they came
Right.
about, and the analogy was, well, what's now? I mean, our kids will never learn how to do math now that calculators are there. And the approach we've taken eventually was, well, if you're in primary school, we definitely are going to not allow you to use these calculators, so you actually learn to do the things I talked about before, these guesstimating, to do math in your head. But then as you go into high school and beyond, we actually are going to allow to use calculators because that's what you're going to use when you go out there to the wild. I think we are likely to see something similar to that, where definitely in primary school and so on, we do want to make sure that kids learn how to write. They do learn how to express themselves. And whether we're gonna fully, I mean, prohibit these in schools or ban them in schools, or are we going to maybe conduct enough exercises in class where students cannot use them to make sure that they learn how to write. But this way or the other, we definitely want to make sure that people know how to write, independent of having machines that help us write. But eventually, as we again go to high school and beyond, I think we will need to prepare people to a world in which we have now tools that help us to write. Maybe to give you another example, I mean, I'm an immigrant to this country. Um,
Hmm.
from Israel, a non English speaking country, um, came to this country in the era of spell checkers. Am I spelling worse than I would have if spell checker did not exist? For sure. If I did not have spell checker, I would have been a better speller these days. On the other hand, are my documents better spell checked than they would have been had spell checker did not exist? They're absolutely better spell check than if I didn't have spell checkers and had just to learn how to spell, right? So eventually, I think again another analogy here that eventually our documents will become better, but some of it
Hmm.
will be us, some of it will be the generative AI. I do think that there are several important issues that we need to worry about. One of them is currently misinformation and the fact that they are doing
Yeah.
something that
Big time.
is called hallucinations in the language of these language models. They make up stuff because it's
Yeah.
a predictive model that predicts the next word, and the next word may not be correct, or the next sentence, or the source, for example, that they provide may not be correct. So they do tend to hallucinate. So we need to find a solution for it. I am optimistic that the industry will find solution for it because it's an important problem. But maybe the more worrisome situation is that we now have the ability to generate a lot of text that creates by machine and by people with ill intent who will actually use it for the wrong purposes. It could be very persuasive language, right? It's very easy now to create misinformation with a very persuasive language using your models.
Yeah.
So I'm very sympathetic to the industry call to, I don't think pause, because I don't think pause is possible at this point, but for
Right.
regulators to already think about how do we, for example, authenticate something that comes from a machine so people know that whether they're speaking to a machine or to a human and so on. I think we definitely need to already be working on regulations, maybe not mimicking the mistakes that we've made with social media, letting the industry regulate itself.
Yeah. That's worked out fantastically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the idea, especially in political ads, and they talked about having a watermark, and saying, "Hey, this was generated by AI" or something like that. But one story, quick story, I'll share. That's fun. I needed to send a letter. I was mentioning the Denver. live event, right? At least on the live, it won't be on the recorded version of the podcast. But everybody that listens, they know I did a live event in Denver, or I'm planning to do so. And I needed to write an email inviting more people to attend, right? And at this point, let's say there was 8 tickets left, okay? But Oded, I was tired. So what am I going to do? How am I going to get this email written? I decided, well, Chat GPT-4 is a perfect solution. I had already written an 8-page document myself that explained the event, the benefits, right? What you'll learn, the outcomes, deliverables, so on and so forth. And I asked the robots to, hey, read this 8-page document and write a concise email that invites people to attend, right? And it did it while I slept. I took a nap, a 20-minute nap, and when I woke up, it was there. I would say it's about 80% of where I wanted it. So I revised and massaged, to 20% to get it to my voice. And then I hit send, and a bunch of people applied and they came, right? So that's a teammate of mine now. It's a colleague, right? It's a tool, just like a calculator, and it helped out, right? And the best thing, those leaders that come to Denver, they're going to get a great result too. You know what I mean? So it's a win-win, triple win scenario for me. And yeah, so appreciate you sharing that. Let's
And
get
I
to.
very
Oh, go
much,
ahead.
by the way, relate to the word, to the phrase you use, which is a colleague, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
think about having a colleague who just read the entire internet. Think about you're a programmer, and now I have a
yeah.
colleague sitting next to me who just read every single code ever written and is helping me
Hmm.
writing my code. It's it
Yeah.
it could be a tremendous value with dealing with the risks of understanding what is really human created and how. But
Right, 100%. I wanted some. There's a white paper I wanted to put out around principal development and retention forever. And to be honest, personally, I'm not making the time. I don't have the time for it. So that means I'd either have to delegate to somebody on my team or find somebody out there, a freelancer, sort of interview, see if they're the right quality, so on and so forth, and then the cost and all of that. Or what I chose to do is at least draft the first version. I asked ChatGPT, here's the audience, superintendents, assistant superintendents. Here's the solution, the leadership community that we support, and some information around it. And write me 2,500 to 5,000 words with and include at least 10 pieces of research, right? Cited. And it spit something out. There's work that needs to be done for sure on it. But man, did that get me like really closer to done a lot faster. So yeah,
one
appreciate
thing I would
all your
advise in
ideas on
this
AI.
situation is check the sources, because because it's a predictive
Oh yeah.
model. The
Yeah,
sources
yeah,
are
yeah.
often not necessarily the real sources. There will be around the right source, but not always the exact one.
Well, and to your point, I wasn't going to record it, but now I will since you're bringing it up. I think it hallucinated a few, right? Because
Yes.
it did say one that was like an unpublished article, and I'm just like, that thing just totally made something up and cited it as valid. And I know that personally. So that's an issue that I have to change if I do anything with this report. To date, I haven't done anything. I just did this last night while I was watching Barry on HBO Max. So, anyways, okay, cool. Let's get to the last three questions that I ask all my guests. And thanks again for being here. And Ruckus Makers, definitely check out Decisions Over Decimals. Get that at dodthebook.com. So, Oded, if you could put a message on all school marquees around the world for a single day, what would your message be?
I would focus on, it's not about the destination, enjoy the journey. I think we are way over
Mm,
focusing on the outcome, on the metric, on the destination. It's not about the destination, enjoy the journey.
100%. Now let's talk about your dream school, Oded. You're building your dream school. You're not constrained by resources. Your only limitation is your ability to imagine. How would you build this dream school? And what would be the three guiding principles?
Maybe it relates to things we already talked about, but in
Sure.
different places. But focus on understanding, not necessarily on knowledge, but the ability to understand. I mean, again, I relative to my own education, um, when I was young, I think that schools are much better in teaching my kids to understand math as opposed to know math, to think through the processes of how did you come up with the answer. Don't just give me the answer. focus on questioning skills. I would have a guiding principle on kids that are teaching kids to be curious, to ask questions. Less focus again on the typical, definitely in the end, in the entry into school, on testing, and particularly testing around a time period, right? We teach kids to think fast on in an exam type. Where is that useful in life apart from the next test that they'll need to do in order to get to other places in life? But if you really want to change the way education is being done, we need to teach less for testing and much more for critical thinking, for, again, through understanding and through learning how to ask questions. And the third one would be around what I just mentioned as what I would put on every school, which is I would focus the school on the journey as opposed to on the destination, making sure that kids love to come to school, enjoy the journey, the process of learning, and not just this exam or the other exam, or getting to this school or the other school after this school. Um, Really making sure that the journey matters, that every moment we have the kids, we need to make sure that the journey matters. Even if they do for that at that point in time something they may not enjoy, because not everybody enjoy every part of school, but that they appreciate that it's about the journey, and it's not about just getting again this grade or the other grade at the end of it.
Brilliant. We covered a lot of ground today, Oded. Of everything we discussed, what's the one thing you want a ruckus maker to remember?
Look for the surprises. Trust your doubt.